Here to Roaring Camp. Why, Bret Harte wrote a book called The Luck of Roaring Camp. I know some of you have read it, some of you haven't, but in his book he talks about this triangular meadow at the base of the trail. Now I don't know that his stories were true. He was a writer out of New York. He came out to California back in the 1850s to lure as many people as he could to come from the east out here to California in this part of the world. And in doing so, he gathered a whole series of stories that he then, after retiring or after the early days of the gold rush, he went ahead and he wrote a whole series of stories all about throughout the Mother Lode. Now he says that the child of luck was born, you know where that log cabin is as you come through the gate. Now I've rebuilt it twice in my lifetime, and it was rebuilt before that. You'll find in it nails that would have been hand forged by some foundry or somebody that just made a nail at a time, and then you'll find the square nails that people think are history, and then you'll go ahead and find the round nails, or some that I have used when I put it together. It was many times larger than that. But the stuff that's left there was whatever we felt we could salvage. As the building got smaller, we kept doing that. It to me had no importance at that time, more than a place that we could get out of the rain. So if I'd have known what I know today, why I'm sure I'd have kept in this original form, and it would have been about, maybe 2.5 times that size. Now he said the child of luck was born. As I said before, I don't know if that's true, but we do know when he described the location of Roaring Camp, coming off a trail, that's the trail that I talk about called the Clinton Bar Trail, and it came in here to camp. And then he says, and just upstream from where the three forks of the river, they didn't have the name of Ptolemy then, but where the three forks of the river come together. And of course that's the only meadow, the only piece of property could be, so we do know that part of it is correct. I'm going to just touch a little bit on Caesars. A lot of our people I know spent some of their week, some of their time up at Caesar's diggings. That's the top of the mountain right over here. Those of you that came down the truck tonight, your guide would have taken you up and showed you some of the old tunnels. Well, you know, a long, long time ago when I was coming in, it was all strictly horses or mules that came in. I did bring a few people. People keep bugging me, can I get into that canyon? And somehow you'd put them on the back of the mule, and I think they wish they hadn't been there before they left the top, but somehow either a good cinch or something kept them on until we get here to the bottom, and then they didn't want to leave. But we used to get together somewhat like this here quite often with a smaller group, of course, and young Caesar, now, he was still alive. That's that one tunnel where you see the timbers haven't completely rotted out. There's still some of the timbers existing. That tunnel goes in, quite a few hundred feet. Now, the family was quite different. There had been he kept telling me stories all the time about his uncles and his grandparents and his great-grandparents and so forth that they came into that. And he always said, well, you know, that was their tunnel over there. And I'd say, well, I don't see any tunnel. And he'd say, no, I'll tell you where it's at, right in behind here. You know, whenever any one of us die, they've always gone ahead and they've collapsed the front part of the tunnel. I'm sure it became their grave. That was the purpose that perhaps it was being done. And a young Caesar, of course, he lived for quite a long time after I was here in the canyon. And he would join our parties once in a while, and everybody keep asking him questions and so forth. And finally one night we happened to have some people here from Hollywood. In fact, my goodness, my mind I can't remember names as well as I used to, but anyway, he was a director out of there, and when he came here into the canyon, wanted to know about someday doing a story or so forth and so on. And so he started asking, well, what about Caesar's up there? What can you tell me? Well, young Caesar finally broke loose that night, and he started to tell him a bit about his great-grandfather, and he said, well, he was the first one of that group, you know, of the Caesar family to come in, and everybody said, well, then what happened to him? He said, well, how did he get that property? So finally then, he went on and he was saying, well, you know, actually, way back in that period of time, there was a storekeeper down here, and he was the one that kind of kept everybody together. When they had problems, why they'd go up to the storekeeper and tell him what went on, and he would keep their gold for them. They didn't trust each other, I don't think, too far with it. And he said, well, but you know, what happened was up once and he died. Well, everybody thought that was really the saddest thing in the world. Now, what were they going to do? But finally, someone says, well, we got to do something for him. So they decided that the people here in camp would go ahead and give him a decent burial. So naturally, that meant that part of the miners got together and built a wood box. That was a coffin, of course, that they had. And then some of them got together and they dug a hole in the ground for the gravesite. And then another group went on up the trail and on into the town of Clinton to fetch the minister. So all of this took a few days and took place, and finally it did happen down here at camp, and it all got together and everybody put on their best, and they all gathered around that gravesite, which would have been up here, way up in here. I'm pointing away from there because here's where that tunnel was those days. Just about at this level, going up. And so anyway, they all got around there, and the minister doing his thing come over, and he reached down and he grabbed a handful of this gravel. He started to let it drop down on that wood box, and all at once he looked, you know, a nugget went through his finger there. And being a good man of the cloth, why, he held his composure, and pretty soon he reached down and he grabbed another handful, and lo and behold, a bigger piece of gold started to fall, and went down and bounced, and all at once he stopped and he said, all right, men, get this box out of here. This is my mining site. You know, he said, that was my great-grandfather. That's how the Caesars came into the all week, and our marshal is one of my entertainers. My goodness, thank goodness for me. Not one of my entertainers, but I call him that because I think he likes to entertain me too. Come on over here, will you, Neil?
I'm a little sore, but...
Here and hardly, why should I work? Anyway, I will go back to a little bit of gold mining. That's what our camp basically is all about. I find most people get a little gold fever. There's no question about it. It's always, well, this time of the year that we, you know, caution people about what might happen and so forth and staying out of the water. I see Jack showed up over there. Hey, Jack. Would you come over by that counter? That's all right. Right there is fine. You know, we told a story about him, so I'm going to switch off that story that I was going to tell you, and we're going to talk a little bit about an experience of Jack. You know, he showed up down here, I think he said a while ago, it was 61. And now, actually, they didn't show up here down at camp at that time because that was before the road was put into this part of the world. I had nothing but the trails. So again, he had, well, a brother Roy. Roy is no longer with us. Then he had brother Bob. Now, Bob is still around. Actually, you know, they were hard-working, had lots of families, lots of this, but anyway, they had some of the most crudest-looking mining equipment I think I'd ever saw in my life, and I did pack it in down off that trail over to the other side of it over there, and at that point, why they took and they drug that down the mountain. Way down, oh, it's miles down, is where the fence line actually comes and crosses the river here. And, you know, they went in there, I'm not sure, they're out of Mississippi, and I don't know whether there's no gold, really there's gold in Mississippi, but they're so darn deep in the mud below it and that, and the alligators, why, I don't think they'd ever done any mining, but they were all hep, and they had read enough books, I guess, that they understood. But anyway, I had left them on down there, and I visited them every so often. But there was a time then when I had left the canyon for, it had to be 3-4 months. And those of you that live here in our part of the world know that Jackson, at that time, was probably the wildest, the craziest town that ever lived. In fact, it had gambling that run long after the gambling quit everywhere else in the world, but until they started opening casinos around the world.